First, a quick word on the scope of the issue. The planet as a whole today consumes 89.2 million barrels of oil every day. 89 million barrels of oil every day. The United States is the single largest consumer at just under 20 million barrels a day. We are not able to supply all of our own needs, and therefore we are obliged to import more than 9 million barrels a day. It's very close to 10 million barrels a day of oil. I mentioned we are the single largest consumer on the planet. Next in line is China. They have to import 5 million barrels a day. Third is Japan at more than 4 million barrels a day, but you can expect that to go up because of the loss of their nuclear energy access, and that's a topic we'll go into in a minute, in a little while. Of our suppliers, more than 50% of everything we import comes from the Western Hemisphere. 19% of all of our imports come from Africa, overwhelmingly Nigeria, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. 16% come from the Middle East, overwhelmingly Saudi Arabia. A word on the relative order of magnitude. The average American consumes twice as much energy as the average Brit, 6.5 times as much energy as the average Brazilian, 21 times as much as the average Indian, Asian Indian. The world demand for energy is expected to grow more than 45% over the next 20 years. 73% of that additional demand is expected to come from the developing world, overwhelmingly China and India. The expectation for that demand growth in the developing world is for the purpose of fueling economic development and growth. And I'm going to throw a thesis out. There's a lot of scholarship behind it, but I'm from the government. I'm going to ask you to trust me. The thesis is development is good. The more people who have access to clean water, the better. The more people who have access to reliable, affordable electricity, the better. The more people who have access to education, the better. The more they have opportunity for jobs, the better. The more roads they have to take produce to market, the better. The more they can participate in the international economy, the better. To do that, they need electricity, they need water, they need roads, they need jobs. It is in the planet's interest for as many people on the planet to enjoy those benefits as possible. For them to grow, they need to fuel that growth. To fuel that growth, they need energy. Energy, good. The contrary is also true. It is not in the planet's interest to have runaway famine, runaway poverty, disease. The more people feel they have nothing left to lose, we all lose. So development, good. The lack of development, not good. Failed states, not good. Not good for anybody. So the global projections are, by the year 2030, and I want you to keep that in mind because all those babies are already born today who are going to need this stuff, right? By the year 2030, the planet will use 53% more coal than it uses today, 42% more natural gas than it uses today, 22% more oil than we use today, and oil remains the single largest fuel in the primary fuel mix of the planet in 2030. Question: is there enough supply to meet this demand? Now, we get into a controversy, and it's called the peak oil debate. The peak, if you were to look at a chart, and you would see the peak of supply, it essentially refers to, when people talk about the peak oil debate, they're talking about that point at which half of all the supplies have been used. Doesn't mean we run out of oil. It just means it becomes harder to get, more expensive, takes longer, requires more technology, becomes lots more expensive in the process. You still have it, but you're now on the downside of the slope on the graph. And up until now, we've certainly been on the upside of the slope on the graph. Does anybody disagree? And the answer is no. Does anybody disagree that oil, petroleum, traditional fossil fuels, and when we talk about fossil fuels, we're always talking about coal, oil, and natural gas, that it's finite? And the answer is no. There's no disagreement. Everybody agrees it's finite. At some point, the planet will run out of these products, these resources. But the problem is, to figure out where peak use is, you need to know the totality of what is in the planet, in the ground. And we don't know what that is. So if you don't know what the 100% quantity is, it's really hard to figure out when you hit 50% of it. So the peak part is exactly that which is the question. Now, why is it we don't know what we have on the planet? Lots of factors. I'm going to run through several of them. Officially, the planet has run out of oil 4 times already. So I want to give you some sense of why this seems to be so. A big one is technology. In 1970, the definition of full production of any known oil field, that is to say, you have a field, you know what's there. What is the definition of full production? Full production in 1970 was that you could extract 40% of all the oil that we know is in that field, 40%. Today, the state of the technology is such that the definition has changed. And the definition of full production is now 70%. Does it mean there's more oil in the ground? No. It means we can get at it. It is accessible. It is extractable. It is producible at market feasible prices. It makes it worth it to go in and get that extra 30%. Doesn't mean we have more. Doesn't mean we recalculated and said, oops, we made a mistake. It means we can get at more of it. So the definition of full production after 40 years in the technology is 70%. Will that change? Sure. Technology evolving? Sure. Another factor. Everybody agrees we need more energy. Everybody agrees we need more electricity. Everybody agrees we need more oil, we need more terminals, we need more pipelines, we need more refineries, just not in my backyard. NIMBY, not in my backyard. My home state's California. We have a beautiful coastline, gorgeous sunsets. You stand there and you get so romantic and mushy, and the sunsets are actually a function of pollution being refracted through, having the light being refracted through pollution, but never mind. And so what happens? The politicians say, we are not going to destroy this pristine, beautiful coastline. I promise, if you elect me, I will not allow any offshore drilling for 25 miles. And another politician comes along and says, hey, I can beat that. You elect me, I promise there will be no offshore drilling for 50 miles. And we'll have a pristine shoreline. But there's this thing called curvature of the earth. And if you stand at one point, you look out, no more than 15 miles, and you can't see any offshore rig terminal. But not in my backyard is a real political factor. It's not about whether we can use the oil that we have or the natural gas that we can produce and get it out of the ground. It's not about what's in the ground. It's the politics of it. The politics of petroleum, the politics of energy, not in my backyard. There are lots of these things. There's also banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. There are a lot of these. So, technology, NIMBY, nature. We don't know when the next act of terror is going to take place. Not in our country, not in anybody else's country. But we know every year we're going to have hurricanes. We know we're going to have so many of them. We give them names, and we give them names in alphabetical order. We know so well that we're going to have hurricanes, that we have a hurricane season. It begins June 1. We know so well the track of the hurricane's path that we can plot it. The weathermen can predict it. We know exactly where it's going to come. It happens to be where our refineries are, where our receptive terminals are, where our regasification plants are, where our pipelines are. Why? Because of NIMBY, we can't put them anywhere else. Our strategic petroleum reserve is in exactly the path of hurricanes. Is it because we didn't know? No, we knew. The politics of it. It's about supply disruption, not about whether it's in the ground. Nature. Man's way. Oil workers off Nigeria are being taken hostage. Enough that almost 1 million barrels of oil a day cannot get to the market. That's pretty substantial. Right now, Libya's 1.3 million barrels a day, not on the market. That's pretty substantial. There are pirates off Somalia. It's not about whether the oil was there. It's about whether or not it can get to the marketplace. National policies. Bangladesh thinks their natural gas is so precious, they've decided to leave it in the ground. Venezuela decided that their oil was a national asset, threw out the likes of ConocoPhillips and Shell, and said, we're taking it over. We're going to produce the oil ourselves. We don't need that high-tech, highfalutin stuff. We're going to do it. And the reason we're going to do it ourselves is so that we can control the revenues. It's not about big oil companies. We're going to take that money and we're going to subsidize the price of meat in Venezuela. And two things happened after they threw folks out. One, production levels of their oil fields dropped because they're not plowing their expertise or their revenues back into the industry. And number two, there was a black market in meat instantly formed. National policies also project how whole regions will develop. I said the fastest growing areas, the ones that are going to drive up demand for energy, are overwhelmingly China and India. Third is the Middle East. They want to develop their societies. They want to develop their economies. They're building schools because, in part, we stopped letting them into the United States after 9/11. They're building their own expertise. They want to develop their own engineers. And in the case of the United Arab Emirates, they want to be the first carbon neutral country on the planet. It's called the Masdar Initiative. They've already funded it fully. In Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah has created the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, bringing in Nobel Prize-winning scientists from all over the world. The United States does not have a monopoly on smart people. And they, as a matter of national policy, have decided they are going to direct the development of their countries for next generations. And to do that, they are using more energy. And what does that mean? Less of it goes onto the market because they're using it for their own development. Did it mean we suddenly had a shortage in the ground? No. Does it mean there's a major supply disruption? No. The resource is being used, it's just not on the market anymore. Geoeconomic shifts. When you look at the growth of the Asian countries in particular, you see tremendous effort put into acquiring energy resources, utilizing energy resources, and developing, if people are lucky, their own societies. India. If India does nothing, its GDP will grow at 7.5% this year. If it rains, 8.5%, because the crops will be good. And they've got a bumper crop in wheat and corn, by the way, this year. They have a growing middle class. There are more people in India's middle class today than the United States has people. And what do they want to do with all this newfound wealth? They want cars. And what are those cars going to run on? Gasoline. And where are they going to go? They're going to go on roads. They're going to need electricity. They're going to need motels. They're going to need restaurants. They've got places to go and people to see. That's all part of development. China has doubled in 3 years the number of cars on their highway. They're all the way up to 25 million cars. They have promised their population that there will be 100 million cars in China by the year 2015. Now, China has 1.3 billion people. The United States has just under 320 million people, and we have 240 million vehicles. Now, if you assume some of us are too young to drive, and if you assume some of us are too old to drive, then some of us must have more than one car. So, if you are a manufacturer, say of cars, the market in the West is saturated. How many cars can these Americans drive? But the markets in the East are wide open and hungry. So where do you want to market? Where do you want to establish a foothold? Where do you want to get a branch office? China and India. So you see a geoeconomic shift from west to east. This is changing how our energy is used, where it goes, and how it gets there. The patterns of human consumption. I come from a middle-class family, middle-class town in Los Angeles. Our family had, and all my little friends' families had, the same thing. We had one car. We had one TV. We had one telephone. And until my dad had the half bath built, we had one toilet. And all my little friends' families had the same thing. That was a classic middle-class family. You can't find a house today that only has one toilet. How we consume, what we consume, changes over time. Did it mean there was suddenly more or less oil in the ground? No. My mother wasn't deprived or denied. It simply never occurred to her to redo the kitchen. Global economic health. We are coming out of, some are still looking to come out of, a global recession. Now, what that means, when everybody is pulling in, tightening their belts, is they're using less energy, they're consuming less. And was it in fact reflected in our numbers? Yes. If I were meeting with you in 2008, we would be talking about a sudden plummeting in the price of oil. September in 2008, the price for a barrel of oil was $154. By Christmas, it was $34. And what happened? We all tightened our belts. And in fact, we used less energy. And in fact, the planet went down to 84 million barrels a day, down from 86 at the time. But now we're at 89. What happened? Some of the planet recovered more quickly. Some of the planet is rioting in the streets, say in Athens. So there's a disconnect. This means the demand for energy continues in some places, driving up the prices of that energy all over for everybody. That means that the global cooperation we used in the beginning of this administration has now fallen apart. We agreed with the G22, all these major consuming economies got together, and we decided we would coordinate how we respond to the economic crisis. But what's happened since then? Some have in fact recovered so well they're worried sick about how they can keep their currency cheap. And we're trying to keep our currency strong. The Europeans were of the same mind as the rest of us. Now the Europeans can't even talk to each other. There are predictions that the euro is going to collapse and the EU will fall apart. And that's just within Europe. The global economic health is suffering. And that affects whether or not much needed investment into new technologies, whether to be more effective in extracting conventional fossil fuels or producing alternative fuels, maybe developing the renewable field better. Why? Because when the price of oil drops, the standard to beat is harder. If the price of oil is $100 a barrel, and I can come up with an alternative fuel that will make money at the equivalent of only $50 a barrel, I can make money, I can tell my friends, I can get investors to come join me and to develop these alternatives or these renewables or these refinements in technology. But if the price of oil has plummeted to $34 a barrel, and I've got all my investors counting on $50 a barrel for the equivalent of making money, I now not only have lost my shirt, I now owe everybody money. So what happens? The investment dollars dry up. It's not safe. Yes, maybe algae will work. Maybe thermal will work. Maybe we'll have a better film for photovoltaics, but not without heavy subsidy. And who's got the money? The money isn't in the West anymore. The money for the geoeconomic shift moved from West to East. So the only people who can afford these massive subsidies are the likes of China, Saudi Arabia, but not us. And so you see not only the shift for the geoeconomic health of the world moving from West to East, but also the investment for the alternatives moving from West to East, because they can afford it, and we can't. The government doesn't have any independent money. The government doesn't run nationalized industry. The government has for money what it gets from you, me, and General Motors, and we're not too sure about General Motors. So, the question is it possible to meet the needs that we're certain will continue, will grow? All the projections are clear. And the answer is yes, it is possible. Can we do it without losing or amending the American way of life? Yes, it is possible. How do we do that? Bet you haven't gone 2 days without hearing the term energy independence. The United States has the world's largest coal reserves. We are number 2 in natural gas production. Actually, technically, if you count unconventional gas, we're now number 1. We are the 3rd largest producer of oil, the world's largest producer of ethanol. Brazil is 2nd. The world's leader in installed geothermal capacity, the world's largest producer of nuclear-generated electricity. And with all that, the United States is still the single largest importer of oil. So, if by energy independence we mean we will consume no more than we produce, we're already far short of the mark. So how do we get to the point where we can, in fact, meet the world's certain growth of energy demand without having it come at our expense? Is it possible to do that? And the answer is yes. And if there's only one thought to take away from our discussion this morning, please keep in mind that there is nothing inevitable about resource wars. We do not have to go to war. We do not have to compete. But it requires that there be international coordination and cooperation. We don't have to go to blood. And the problem that you see in all of these headlines and all the scare tactics and the 30-second sound bites is, we need it, they've got it, we got to go get it. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do that. What do we have to do? This could take forever, and I'm not allowed to take forever. So what I'm just going to say briefly is it's a 3-pronged approach. All 3 are required. There's no single silver bullet, and they have to be undertaken simultaneously. I don't want to give them numbers because that would imply priority. All of them are important. The cheapest, most readily available energy to us is that which we now waste. So, energy efficiency. We are, in fact, seeing that in our industry. The construction industry, when it's healthy, is actually building tighter, more efficient homes. Even the car industry is producing more efficient cars today. When the middle-class Molly that was growing up didn't know about 30 miles per gallon, and industry now talks about getting to 50 miles per gallon because it is in their interest. There is demand for it, consumers want it. If energy is free, then we won't care. We won't take care to be more efficient. But when it becomes dear, when it becomes more precious, when it becomes more expensive, then we look for ways to husband our efforts. We look for ways to be more efficient. And that is, in fact, what's happening. Everybody knows about the change of light thing that Walt Disney and the Department of Energy came together and produced the little energy rat that was the star of Ratatouille. The kids know. The little energy rat makes a point about how we need to change the light bulbs. If you know the story. If every household changed one bulb from a regular incandescent to a combined fluorescent, it would save more than $600 million in annual energy costs. Save enough energy to light 3 million homes. And if we switched all the light bulbs in the houses, then 80 power plants could be closed today. And if the whole world did it, 270 coal-burning plants could be closed. People don't like the combined fluorescents because of the mercury, and it requires special handling for disposal. So now the LEDs have come out. And it's a market-driven thing, but it's greater efficiency, more and longer-lasting energy than ever before. Energy Star appliances, nobody knows what the star stands for. All we know is the star is good. Star good by Energy Star, right? In fact, there is a body which meets every year to adjudicate and, in fact, make the standards tougher every year, so that gradually our Energy Star appliances, in order to get the star, every year have to get better, have to become more efficient. The whole world should know about Energy Star appliances and be on that scale. That's a part of our foreign policy agenda. We're also trying to promote tariff-free, duty-free, or concessions for Energy Star appliances. Now, we use these Star appliances. We create the standards. We don't make any of them. They're all made in China, and the Chinese don't use them. So another effort in our foreign relations is to get global adoption of standards, global use of something that is good for the entire planet. It's not a favor to us. We don't even make this stuff anymore. Okay, so one element of the three is greater energy efficiency. Another element of the three is expand the universe of available fuels. And this we could talk about forever. It is so exciting. Are there alternatives? Yes. What can they include? All kinds of things, the thermals and the algaes, and what about the renewables, the solar and the wind? Very exciting stuff, very exciting stuff. The issue of what do we use the fuels for? 90% of everything that we import, we use for the transportation sector. We're good on industry, we're good on buildings, we're good on appliances. We are out of control on the highways. In Europe, the majority of what they use their energy for is to generate electricity and to produce heat. In Asia, what they use the majority of their energy for is for industry, for manufacturing. For us, it's cars. Now, we're not going to start driving cars with windmills on top. So the trick is, what can we produce in the way of alternative fuels or renewable fuels that will relieve the pressure on the traditional hydrocarbons we need for the transportation sector? Are there things we can do? Yes. Are there alternative fuels to be used in cars? Yes, there are. The infrastructure problems are the greatest. But the technologies are very available and very possible. But it takes us roughly 27 years to switch out from one industry into another. And the reason is because we are already saturated, because we're already so thoroughly embracing of a given technology. If you go to a brand new setting where you have sudden growth, say in India or China, they can adopt everything, and it's wonderful. But for us, to adopt something new means we are displacing something already. That means jobs, that means industry, that means people suddenly without work. So it takes us roughly 27 years. We need to get out of the idea of corn-based ethanol, get off the food standard. Ethanol, yes. Corn-based, no. And we can talk about that at great length. Lots of other reasons for not doing it. Hydrogen cars, people talk about that. To compress the hydrogen in a car, you need the car to be around 2.5 times as heavy, and you are now looking at little hydrogen bombs on the highway with all of the road etiquette we are famous for, those internationally recognized arm gestures we are famous for. So what kinds of things are out there in terms of moving beyond hydrocarbons? Lots, and it's very exciting stuff. Biggest problems when you look at supplying electricity are twofold. One is storage, and the other is transportation. How do you move electricity? It so happens that if you are looking at wind, the wind tends to be in the northwest of the country. The sun tends to be in the southwest of the country, but the need is in the east of the country. And our efficiency is such, and this is particularly true in terms of battery. An issue is, what do you do when the sun isn't shining? What do you do when the wind isn't blowing? You have to find ways to store it. Our storage technology is coming along, but right now, the challenge is, how do you store it and how do you move it to the people who need it? Right now, today, for every 1 unit of electricity that gets to its intended address, we lose 3 in heat. So moving energy, storing energy, essential. Questions of, I know, I'm sorry, I'm moving out quickly here. Nuclear, for the last 25 years, world electricity generation has increased by 100%. The use of nuclear-generated electricity has increased by 200%. The United States has not built a nuclear power plant in over 30 years, but that hasn't kept the rest of the world from going forward, and 65 new plants are in progress now. Big deal, the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Big, big deal. Now, what does that mean? Everybody is looking at that disaster and suddenly pulling back. Germany is pulling back. Russia is pulling back. China says we're going to study it. Everybody's pulling back. Okay, what does that mean? Let us assume people are going to pause and they're not going to use the nuclear that they were using, or they're not going to build for the nuclear they intended to use in the future. It means a greater crunch on traditional fossil fuels. Already we're seeing it in Japan, where they're trying to generate their electricity. They're now 30% short. They're trying to generate their electricity using natural gas. Growth on demand of traditional fossil fuels, it's a big deal. We believe that nuclear power, nuclear-generated electricity is still a doable thing. We want to make sure that we are safe 6 ways from Sunday. So right now you see people all worried sick about Fort Calhoun in Nebraska, but Fort Calhoun in Nebraska is not going to get a tidal wave because it's not in Fukushima. It's not sitting on the intersection of 3 major tectonic plates. We should maybe try not to do that one again. And so how to protect, how to provide the extra security, and oh, by the way, and this is a whole different conversation we could spend another 2 hours on, how to do it so that it's clean. We are hard on the planet. We are choking on this planet. And all of our alternatives have an impact on global greenhouse emissions. I had said we don't know what the planet has, and therefore we have a really tough time identifying where the halfway mark is. So we don't know where the peak in the peak oil controversy is. What we do know exists, that which we have identified, 2/3 of it is in the Middle East. The top 5 oil producers on the planet are Saudi Arabia, Russia, United States, Iran, and China. How we relate to these countries is critical on multiple fronts. Irresponsible rhetoric is costly, and the key to the planet being able to meet its certain and known demand, growth for energy, growth for development, requires that there be cooperation and coordination. I mentioned we have the single largest repository of coal in the United States. China has a lot of coal. India has a lot of coal. It is natural that we work together in international R&D projects, research and development projects, to develop carbon capture and sequestration, CCS. Now, there's no such thing as clean coal. I mean, there's clean coal the way there's safe cigarettes. But we can get to cleaner coal. 2 issues there. One is burn it more cleanly so that it has less in the way of greenhouse emissions. And the second is that which is emitted, no matter how safely you try to constrain it, capture it and store it. So, yes, the fellow coal repositories of China and India are our natural partners in this R&D. Surprise, surprise, we've got another really great partner. Nobody would have guessed this. It's Saudi Arabia. Why? They want to take that captured carbon and use it to put pressure in the ground to enhance their ability to extract oil instead of using precious water. It's called EOR, Enhanced Oil Recovery, and it is very much a part of our international cooperation. The last element, there are lots of these elements, but I'm only doing these 3 because it's so crucial. Invest in innovation and smart people. I mentioned we do not have a monopoly on smart people. I was in Canada, in Alberta, visiting the oil sands, and somebody asked me about unconventional oil and gas in this country because it's a game changer. But anyway, I was in Alberta, and the guy who was giving me the tour was a manager of this huge pit, because it's not really a well. They dig a pit and they scrape out this stuff. And I said, what worries you? What wakes you up at night? What's your greatest fear? And he paused and he said, I'm 54 years old. And I said, I understand. He said, no, I'm 54, but my deputy, smart, well-educated, smart guy, he's in his 30s. And he just hasn't seen enough things go wrong. He hasn't seen enough crises. So that the next one he sees, he can't count on being able to say, oh, yeah, I saw one of these 2 years ago, here's what we do. He's got a learning curve. He's good, he's smart, he'll be fine, but he's got a learning curve. That gap is the element of time. It's a classic example of why 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. We cannot throw more resources into this when life is in its crisis. We have to plan it. It still takes 20 years to grow a teacher, right? It still takes 35 years to grow a project manager, right? It still takes 45 years to grow a leader. And we all know some leaders never get that wisdom thing. Time. It takes time. Innovation. Investing in innovation requires that we have proper review, a constant review of our technological and educational priorities. Fact of the matter is, the world did not come out of the Stone Age because we ran out of rock. Every innovation, every transfer from one technology to another has happened before the thing itself ran out. The United States has itself gone through three major energy transitions already. In the early days of our country, we had renewables. We had windmills, we had dams. We moved into coal in the 1800s. We have been a car-driven, oil-driven society for less than 100 years. We can make these transitions. We've got 20 good years. We need to use those years wisely. Thank you very much. I've taken up more of your time for my remarks, and I owe you for a chance to ask questions and to comment. Yes, ma'am.
The question is, do you think it's actually possible that the demands in India and China could actually be beneficial to the U.S.? And I ask this because I have a really good friend who researches Clostridia and also is trying to make the production of butanol much more kind of economically feasible and to try to develop a market in the U.S. And he's actually in talks with several different companies, in particular one company in China, to try to take his idea, his research, and then make it into mass scale. But the only way to do so is it takes millions and millions and millions of dollars, and the money just is non-existent in the States.
Yes, the short answer is yes. The United States has actually produced a lot of very innovative notions, which because of NIMBY, not in my backyard, we've never been able to build a plant. So we have a technology that will take coal, gasify it and liquefy it, and you can drive a car on it. We have never been able to build a plant in the United States because nobody wanted it in their backyard. The Chinese have bought this, and they've now established 3 plants. That's good for everybody. Now, there's still an emissions issue. There's no silver bullet in this spectrum. Everything involves consideration for energy, environment, and the economy. Those 3 things have to be addressed at all times. To not do so, to leave out one of them, is to be unrealistic in your projections. But yes, there are in fact ways of looking at how our notions and somebody else's manufacturing can benefit the world. Yes, sir.
How are you going to change the American culture of profligate overuse of energy?
How are you going to change the
America's overconsumption in terms of individual consumption of energy, not by industry, but by people?
Right. The greatest use of energy is not actually individual use, but I take your point. The economists look at the market forces. The cure for high prices is high prices. Once they get too high, they collapse. The trouble is, when you have market collapse, you have a lot of unintended damage. And it will take us, if we continue to produce jobs at the rate we're producing now, it will take us between 5 to 10 years to get back to the level of unemployment we were in 2008. So these are unintended consequences nobody wants from a market collapse. But that is the cure. High prices will keep people from using as much. If we work hard to subsidize it and make it free or cheap, we do ourselves a disservice. Europeans have to pay $9 a gallon for gasoline. They think we are wasteful. That gets to questions of whether or not you're looking at taxes, and that in this country in particular, the word tax produces an instant allergic reaction. People break out in rash right away. Politicians die, all kinds of horrible things happen. But the idea of having to pay more for a commodity will make you use it more efficiently. That is the primary contributing factor. And no matter what we do, no matter how great we are in our international coordination and cooperation, the price of energy is going to go up. Just in case I hadn't been clear on that. Anybody else? Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Heidi, for letting me come.